Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. You know the theme song. You know what that means. That means it's the weekend, and it's time for the James Freel Show. I am your host, James Freel. This is the 5th podcast on the new platform. I'm very excited to be a part of it, and to have you with me, if I hadn't already expressed that. I think that's a big thing, because when I initially first started this show, it was difficult for me to get over the 3-show hump. And now that I've gotten past the 4-show hump, because it's easier to get past that when you don't have that chip on your shoulder, so it's easy to get past the 4th one. But now that I've gotten past the 4th one, now that I'm on to the 5th one, it makes it a little more manageable. So I'm looking forward to this show we have now. We have a great show ahead of you. It is kind of arrogant of me every time I say we have a great show ahead of you, because unless I have a guest on, it's just me talking, so that's really just me bragging about myself, and I don't want to come off as arrogant, because let's be honest, this really isn't that good of a show. It's a hobby. It's not, I hesitate to even call it an amateur show, but it is what it is. So before I move on to our first segment, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping. And housekeeping has sort of been a thing. I feel as though I've been repeating the same thing every time I housekeep. But tomorrow I have another guest coming on for Conversations with James Freel. This is the 5th guest I've had, and still I haven't had a single Conversations with James Freel uploaded. And to my 1 or 2 listeners out there, I'm sure that's incredibly frustrating. Sarcasm intended. I hope the last Conversations with James Freel I had was, I think, a pretty good success. And as I said on last week's show, I didn't anticipate the level of editing it would require. And the person I had on could very well possibly be someone I could use to edit. I don't know. But tomorrow I do have a new guest. We'll see if the conversation is well enough. There's really an equation between how good the conversation goes and how much effort I'm going to put into the editing. I've also been working on some commercial breaks, because due to the limitations of the software I'm using, I can only have about 30-minute segments, hence why this show is only 30 minutes long. And the editing requires a big investment of my time, and if the conversation wasn't something that I deem worthy of putting up, well, every conversation I've had has been worthy of putting up. But, like I said, for every 30 minutes of conversation I've had, that's about an hour of editing. And as I've mentioned before, this is a hobby, so we'll see where it goes. I look forward to my conversation tomorrow. We'll see how it goes. Again. Now on to news for the uninformed. And again, this is for July 20th, 2018. Some of this may be dated, but hopefully within the week span, you'll enjoy it. On Wednesday, the 12 Thai boys and their football coach, who were rescued from a flooded cave in Thailand, have spoken for the first time and told their story in their own words in a press conference. All of the boys have been released from the hospital after being trapped in a cave for over 2 weeks. Families have expressed to the media that now the boys just want to get back to their lives. Yeah, I can imagine. That must have been a horrific experience. Earlier today I watched animation of how exactly they got those boys out of there. And they gave all of the boys anti-anxiety medication. And after watching how they got out, I totally understand why they would do that. That seems like a traumatic experience. Thank goodness all the boys got out. It's a real shame that one of the Marines died from asphyxiation. I think that's what it was. But all the boys got out, and that's at least a good takeaway from it. In sports, the Major League Baseball's All-Star Game was this week in Washington, D.C. It was the American League over the National League, 8-6. That's interesting. I didn't get to watch it. I heard it was really good. I do like baseball quite a bit. I didn't get to catch it. Interesting. In pop culture, Comic-Con is on in San Diego this weekend. The convention began yesterday and will run through the 22nd of July at the San Diego Convention Center. Comic-Con has been running steadily since 1970 and is considered the granddaddy of all comic conventions. Now, if I understand this correctly, the guest I'm going to have on tomorrow is at a certain comic convention tonight. Maybe he'll be able to tell me about it. That's an interesting... I hope I didn't butcher any of that information. I know some people are really, really into Comic-Con. I'll be honest, I'm not a... There are a few superhero movies I like, but there are a lot that just don't do anything for me. Especially Marvel movies. They're just... I liked the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans, but after that, I think I only liked it because I grew up with them. Anyway, I'm rambling now. Alright, on to the part of the show that you're used to, the rambling section. Interesting, I say, oh, I'm rambling now. Now time for the rambling section. Right, so I'm house sitting right now. And the nice thing about house sitting is it shows that people still trust you. It shows that you're trustworthy. If they're going to trust you with the life of a few pets and to make sure that their biggest life investment doesn't burn down. The problem is when they trust you to do that and you're past the age of 16. Then it's just sort of like, oh, well, that person doesn't have anything going on. We can trust them to watch our house. Well, yeah, you should be able to trust me at this point to watch a house. So it's easy money, but you may be able to notice that there's a... I don't think it's noticeable, but there's a difference in the sound level of whether or not you... maybe it sounds better, maybe it sounds worse. I'm in a different house right now, so that essentially that's the whole thing. I'm house sitting, and there's an interesting thing about house sitting. Maybe it has something to do with the human psyche. Maybe someone can explain the human psyche to me. The way I've house sat 4 or 5 different people's homes. And this is a new one. I've never house sat it before because I'm in a new area. But it's a different experience. You start to feel territorial about the house. Like, oh, this is mine. I'm sitting here now. And in previous homes that I've watched, I've done it on multiple occasions. And I start to feel like, oh, I'm back at this place. I'm in this new environment. But there's different ways you can sort of claim this level of dominance, and the only way I can see that now, and in the, I don't know, 10,000 years ago, it would be, I don't know, what would you do? You would start rearranging their bamboo house. I don't know what they had back then. I do a segment called Uninformed News, so what do you expect? The way I see marking your own territory in someone else's house is by using their Netflix account. Because if I understand this correctly, Netflix has a really complicated algorithm, and it would not surprise me if Netflix can almost tell when someone else is using your account based on the differences. Because whenever I've watched someone's home, everything I watch is always like, oh, this is like a 43% match for you. This is like a 38% match for you. But I like it, so I watch it. And I feel as though I totally skew what their Netflix account would be. And this family that I'm watching for, the father's a preacher. So what I watch, I really like that show, F is for Family. That's a good one. John Mulaney also has a show out that's good. And these are kind of raunchy comedies. And frankly, I'm not a huge fan of raunchiness, but when it comes to comedy for me, I've always felt as though there's an algorithmic line, or an algorithm, an exponential line. And as long as and that line represents, below it is being offensive and above it is funny. And as long as the joke is above that line, in other words, as long as it's more offensive, or as long as it's more funny than it is offensive, I'm fine with it. Or that's not a good principle, and I wouldn't recommend it. And luckily, no one listens to this show, and luckily, no one knows my real name. Did James just mention that he doesn't use his real name on this show? I think he did. Yeah, I've mentioned that in the past, though. But that's my golden rule when it comes to offensiveness. How did I get on this tangent? I was talking about house sitting for other people. And generally speaking, when you house sit, it's really pet sitting. And right now I'm watching a dog, and I can tell you this. Watching a dog is much more stressful than watching a cat. And I think this may be the last time I ever watch a dog. Because watching dogs, especially older dogs, and this is an old dog, it's a stressful ordeal. There's so many things that a dog can do. You have to let them outside if they want to use the restroom. And I'm stressing out just thinking about this right now, how this house could easily, tragedy could strike and no one could have stopped it, except I totally could have because I was held responsible for all of it. Well, somewhat of a tragedy kind of did strike. It really wasn't, yeah, it was kind of bad. Luckily, no one listens to this or else they would find out what I'm talking about. But they're not going to because they don't know what I'm saying. So, this dog is very old, and I was told by the owners they may not make it outside in time. I don't like talking about that subject, so you catch what I'm talking about. And they said, it's not a big deal. Here's how you can clean it up if it happens. If they leak a little bit, that's okay. So I go to do that. And I'm using, so sure enough, that event happens, and I'm like, okay, gotta clean this up. No big deal. No big deal. So I start to clean up, and the stain's not coming out. The stain's not coming out. I'm like, all right, we'll give it a day to dry. I used their method. Next day comes, still not coming out. The stain is still there. And I'm starting to be like, okay, well, maybe the method you're using wasn't quite accurate. Let's use a different method. So I go on to the ever so reliable interwebs to check it out, see what can be done. And one of them suggests using a hairdryer as a drying method. And I think, you know what, that's probably it. It's probably just still a little damp from before. So I think this is a brilliant idea. I'll go do that. So I take a hairdryer. And me being the brilliant housekeeper, house watcher, maid, cleaner that I am, I press the nozzle or the tip of the hairdryer directly on top of the carpet. I know, great idea, right? I think that the heat being applied to it will really suck that moisture out. Lift it up, and what do I see? Carpet today is no longer made out of wool. Carpet is made out of synthetic fibers, things like plastic. So there's a burn mark there. And I was extremely lucky to note that I need to note that the carpet, the burn mark was not that big, but it was big enough to be noticed from far away. So I started to think, oh geez, what am I going to do? Started out. I will end, or not end, but I will explain that eventually the stain did come out, but the burn mark was gone. So it's kind of like an out of the frying pan into the fire. You can easily fix a carpet stain. Well, you can't easily, but it's a fixable problem. Burning the carpet, there's no product at a store that you can use in order to fix that. So I start to go into panic mode because it's like, wow, these people trusted me. And I start thinking of all these scenarios. I'm like, hey, take this money back. You paid me for watching your house. I clearly failed at my job. This isn't even going to remotely cover what it's going to cost to cover that, to replace a carpet. But it happened anyway. So I start to calm down and I think, all right, let's think of a solution. You work in a tech industry. You have to solve problems all the time. How can we solve this problem? And I look at the burn mark, and as I said, contemporary carpets are made out of synthetic fibers, and that's why it melts to plastic. So the plastic that had been melted created like this perfect little patch of, oh, I don't know how to explain it. Just imagine like a smooth patch of plastic, kind of like a hardcover book. It's right there, but like with the jacket, the book jacket, it kind of has the same consistency as that. I think, okay, I could easily take a fabric glue, place it there, and if I had another piece of carpet, I could replace it, and maybe no one would notice. Maybe no one can spot it. I don't know. So I start to think, okay, I gotta get a fabric glue to tell. And I take it, so I go to a fabric store. Well, first, I like to do research whenever I buy a new product. I'm so weird like that. Hey, James, remember that time when you told people how quirky and original you are? You're not original at all. Just keep talking. No one's listening to this. All right, I'm moving on. So I go on the YouTube, and I find reviews of the best fiber glues. Originally, I thought, oh, Gorilla Glue, I have that. I can use that. And upon further research, I'm like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be taking a Gorilla Glue to a carpet. Probably not the best idea. They have fiber glue. I think that might be your best point of defense, your best method of addressing the situation. I find this guy on YouTube recommended this #1 system, and I'm like, all right, I'm going with that. That's probably the best way to go about this. I don't find it at the fabric store that I went to until I got to the checkout line. And there it was, sitting on the end. Originally, I was looking in the fabric section, and they didn't have it there. I actually got to give a shout out to this company. Why not plug them? There's no way that I could ever get a... now that I'm saying this, it's almost as though this whole thing has been a long commercial for... No, not really. I've only been talking about it for 2 minutes. But it's called Fabri-Tac. And it worked, well, there we go, I spoiled the ending. But basically, I take it back, take a cotton swab, just put a light drizzle on top of it, and I wound up finding an extra piece of their carpet. I lifted up their vent, and there was a stray line of it hanging down. And it's hard to describe the pattern of the cotton. I'm going to tweet out a photo of the carpet, and I want to see if you can spot where the imperfection is. And if you can, you will get a mention on the next episode of the James Freel Show. It's not like it's going to be seen or replied by anyone, but hey, I gotta start trying somewhere if I want someone to actually listen to this. So give me a moment, I'm gonna tweet that out really quick. Hold on, let me see, let me find it, and tweet it out. Alright, so as I said before, it's very unlikely that anyone's listening, but hopefully, oh geez, I got 2 more topics to get through before I'm already 2/3 of the way through. Alright, so that was my crazy story. It seems to happen every time I watch someone's house, but we live and we learn and we move on. So, this week I also went to a nature preserve in the Toledo area. And this preserve used to be the site of controversy. Yeah, alright, you know what? Nah, never mind. It was a very interesting thing. I think that nature preserves are in a way better than parks, and it's an interesting concept to try to preserve nature. I don't necessarily follow. Well, I guess I do. I understand the concept. It's a noble thing to try to preserve the way things are going because we're extremely populated. But I enjoy nature preserves because they feel more natural. They feel like you're out in the middle of the nowhere. This nature preserve, that's exactly it. You feel like you're out in the middle of nowhere. Except there's one thing. There's a lot of grid towers that are carrying all these wires to bring power to people. And I think that makes it interesting. Whenever I walk out there, I feel like I'm in a Stephen King novel. I feel like Pennywise is just going to jump out from behind one of these trails. And that's what's interesting about these trails. It's very the trail jumps all over the place. It goes from gravel to dirt to grass, and at some parts of this trail, it feels as though someone just took an industrial-sized lawnmower and just drove it through the plains because that's all that's left of the grass, and you're just zigzagging your way through these plains as if someone said, "Okay, you need to go create a trail. Just go take that lawnmower out there, take the track." One of those lawnmowers that are dragged by a tractor and just brings it through. And he's like, "All right, now I'll go this way. Now I'll go that way." But that makes it a little bit of fun. The trail is only 3 miles long. Some of my favorite parts are the parts that are in the woods. And there was this one spot where I went with my special woman, lady, and we sat on a park bench, and yeah, I mean that was as close to a park. That's as parky as it got, as it had a bench. Although it did have an amazing visitor center that had a lot to do with everything relevant to the controversy that surrounded it, and it was way more detailed than I ever would have thought it would have been. But we sat there, and you could look over this drop of about 15 yards down, 15 meters. I don't know, maybe. Statistically, I'm more likely to get someone who listens, who ascribes to the metric system. But again, this is Toledo, Ohio. I had a guest on who had listened, and they told me I need to stop talking about where I'm from. And if you've listened to me before this platform, you'll get the joke in that. Go look it up. No, don't. You got more important things to do than that. But it was a great. The point I'm trying to make is nature preserves are great, and it's one of the few institutions where they always have that mailing list. It's like, oh, you can sign up to do this, and it's like, well, I actually do want to give you my information. I want to give you my email address because I actually value what you're doing here, and I want to be a part of it. Almost everything else, they're begging for your information because they want to sell it, they want to market it to people or corporations or. And I always feel intruded on. And when I pulled up with my special lady friend, I told her, I was like, this is a place where I'd actually love to sign up for like a members group rather than being begged to be a part of it. But what I love about nature preserves as opposed to parks, beyond what I've already said, the thing about a nature preserve is that things feel a little less disturbed than a park does. And why I love being out in the woods, I'm not a huge hiker, but I enjoy being out in the woods like that. Not a whole lot, but I love history. On James Freel show number 29, I talked about this is what I do, or I've been on this real history kick with audiobooks lately. And the thing about nature preserves for the fourth time. Hey James, remember you said that for it? Yeah, okay, we'll stop with that joke. The woods and nature and the trails change, but the woods, the trees, that's how it looked 100, 200, 300 years ago. It didn't change. Nature stays the same when it hasn't been tampered with by man. And granted, this nature preserve probably has been tampered with a little bit, but it's still probably closer than anything else. For example, architecture. All the buildings I see in downtown, they've changed, they've evolved, but nature doesn't change. Nature is well, it does change, but it changes at a much slower rate than everything else. As far as I can understand, as far as I can see, that's the way it goes about changing, and that's why I like it so much. It's sort of this connection I have. It's like you're on one side of a wall and history is on the other, and you can tap the wall and they can tap back when you look at nature. That's how I feel about it. Another scary thing is I did that nature preserve twice this week. Well, the first time I did it alone. And it's very easy to feel like you're being followed. Especially with all the ambient noise that goes on in nature. Very, very easy to feel like someone's following you. And there were more than one occasion where I felt like someone could jump out and just maul me or destroy me, and I would have nothing to defend myself with. So it can be very creepy, very, very creepy, but it was a good time. And I would highly recommend you check out I don't know if a nature preserve is just the one I went to, but I'm not going to give out the name of it because it would reveal the specific location of Toledo that I am in. Hey, does this guy live in Toledo? Yes, he does. As far as you know. So, beyond that, my regular listeners will know that I am still in school. This is just a hobby of mine, doing these little rambling podcasts that I do. But I have a professor right now who is relatively, let's say he's a person of age. He's elderly. And as I just mentioned, I enjoy stories from history. And I think the elderly provide there's no way to get that better than from people of age, because it's a primary experience. Their own personal account of it may be a little biased based on their own values, but it's still a very good way to get a first-hand account of things. So I like listening to stories of the elderly. It's a first-hand of history, especially, and I've also enjoyed watching. Netflix has this great series. It's produced by I guess saying CNN triggered the Hey Siri function. Yeah, there it goes again. But they have this show. It's about the 70s and 80s, and it's just a blast to watch. I was born in the 90s, the mid 90s, 94 to be exact, halfway through 94. It's interesting to see time before you, because it wasn't so far off. That's what's crazy to me is, let's see, right now I am 24. What was 24 years before I was born? That was 1970. It's interesting stuff to learn about the time before you. So my age, if my age is in equilibrium backwards, look at me trying to sound smart, equilibrium backwards. That's when I would anyway, that's not relevant to what I'm trying to talk about. The one thing with people of age, and this happened with my professor of economics, they have a tendency to not remember things. Their memory goes, and they start to repeat themselves. And I don't have the heart to tell the elderly when they've repeated themselves. I like laughing at their jokes because they're on the way out. They're on the tail end. They're about ready to check out. And I'm not, who am I to, I 95% wholeheartedly agree with the idea that you should just make their last days as memorable as possible. Help them stay active, help them enjoy their golden years. But I knew in a class of about 60 people, someone was going to say, "You already told us this story," from the back row. And I was just like, geez, you couldn't have just let him have this moment. You had to make him feel old. The quote he said was, this economics professor he tells some good stories. And I had an exam today, and I did quite well. If I do say so myself, he graded it really fast and gave it back. This has not been a very entertaining podcast. So how am I going to wrap this up, James? How are you going to do that? If this is your first time listening, it doesn't get much better, but it does get slightly better than this. This is not the best show I've ever put on. So I don't think you'd have any reason to listen again, but please give me another shot. Maybe I'll start this over. No, I won't, because my sunk cost, as what I learned about today. I've already put in the effort. I'm going to stick with it. All right. You know what I hate? I hate labs. I don't really hate them that much, but they feel like this monotonous. Not because they're too hard, but because they're just like, okay, let's do this. This is difficult. I can't figure that one out. Well, this one's alright, but let's just see if the other one can. I don't know. That, especially at what is essentially a vocational program, labs seem a little bit redundant. It seems like you can learn most of what you're ever going to do on the spot. So I don't know how that's going to get addressed. Again, I highly doubt that I have a new listener based on strictly this show, but please consider listening again. I'm not going to not put this show up because it is what it is and I can cringe about it later. It's not like anyone's going to. I'm doing what's called a hat on a hat. It is what it is. Well, that's going to do it for this week's James Freel Show. I hope you made it to the end. I know it's not great, but take care. I'll see you next week.